My name is Evan Fraser. I work at the University of Guelph. I'm a professor, so I work in 55-minute increments, so 7's a bit scary, so I will start my stopwatch now. Today, Torontonians ate about 8 million meals. This means, if my calculations are roughly correct, that about 150 tons of tomatoes and apples, 200 tons of beef, and 550 tons of potatoes were consumed within a few miles of where we are tonight. All this food had to come from somewhere. In the 1960s, it would have come from about 350 kilometers of the city. Today, not so much. Our cereals are almost entirely imported from elsewhere in the continent and abroad. 60% of our fresh produce comes from the southern US or further afield. Grapes from Chile, lamb and apple from New Zealand, and in many ways, this is an extraordinary, wonderful system. Typical Canadians amazingly spend less than 10% of their income on food, and although we don't always eat as healthily as we should, in most regions of the country, healthy food is abundant and for low cost. This has, however, come at a cost. Let's start by thinking about what's happening on our farms. Because our vegetable producers are relatively uncompetitive with places like California, trade agreements have allowed the North America's food processing industry to move south of the border. This means that Canada has lost 143 food manufacturing plants and shed 24,000 food manufacturing jobs since 2008. This means lower and fewer vegetable markets for vegetable producers. Over the past 10 years, Canadian farmers have planted about 6,000 hectares of vegetables per year less, and these 6,000 hectares have been planted up with corn and soybeans. This means that at home, we're losing our crop diversity. Our soil health is poor, and we use more agrochemicals. According to the United Nations, pesticide use in particular has risen in Canada between 2006 and 2010, which was the last year that I was able to get data. And then when we step away from our own context, out of our own backyard, we have to acknowledge a deep irony here. Today, water-demanding crops like tomatoes, strawberries, they're being exported from drought-stricken California to water-abundant Ontario. Essentially, this means that California is exporting its water to us in the form of small, tasteless packages. This also means that all of us, the Canadian consumers, are exposed like never before to global market forces. Our low Canadian dollar and the drought in California mean that the price of imported food, and in particular the price of a diet rich in fruit and veg, has risen faster than inflation. And so our domestic food supply looks pretty dismal. As we all know, nutritionists suggest that half of our diet, when we measure things in terms of dietary servings, should come from fruit and veg. When we convert the food we actually have in Canada into these dietary servings, we discover that only 11% of our food supply is fruit and veg, and there's actually only a couple of servings per day per Canadian. A quarter of our food supply are oils and fats, and another quarter of our food supply are sugars that we should be cutting back on. So, unsurprisingly, food bank use, obesity, and type 2 diabetes are all up. And communities in the far north face a food price crisis where over 50% of households are now classified as food insecure. Embracing these long-distance systems also means that we don't store enough, and we have adopted a just-enough, just-in-time approach to food distribution. Toronto, I've read, only has a 3-day reserve on fresh food, and it's a similar story across the developed world. A few years, a British politician announced, and I love this quote, that civilization is 9 meals away from anarchy. The aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, the panicked buying in British supermarkets during the truck drivers' strike of 10 years ago, these things illustrate how quickly the system can fall apart when our food systems are threatened. Then there's those greenhouse gas emissions associated with food transportation. Producing 10% of our own veggies would allow us to take the equivalent of 8,000 cars off the road in a city like Toronto in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Extraordinary reductions. All of this sounds like an argument in favor of local food. And this is the conclusion that I came to myself working summers on my grandparents' farm in Niagara as a teenager. One summer stands out in my memory in particular. That year it cost about 5 cents a pound to hire students like me to pick cherries. Unfortunately for the students and for the farmers, that year Californian cherries were being imported at 3 cents a pound. So my grandfather's neighbors let their crops go to rot. A better support of the local food system would have stopped that problem. But if only the world was that easy. For instance, let's sort of imagine two hypothetical apples, one on my right and one on my left hand. This one's from New Zealand and it comes to us shipped on a boat. This one's produced in Ontario where it's stuck in a refrigerator for 8 or 9 months. Not only do you have to run that refrigerator, you also have to count on 20% of your product going bad. So scientists have tried to count up all the greenhouse gas emissions associated with these two apples and concluded that it's better to eat the local apple within a couple months of harvest, but it's better to eat the global apple for the rest of the year. Similarly, it seems that lamb produced in New Zealand and shipped by boat to England can be produced with fewer greenhouse gas emissions than British lamb, where sheep are fed corn during the winter months. The list goes on. In other words, the data is contradictory. We face a conundrum. There doesn't seem to be clear guidance for those of us who want to support a more healthy, more sustainable, and secure food system. So by way of conclusion, therefore, let me tell you the parable of the wise banker. Let's imagine we went back to July 2007 and you approached two bankers with your life savings and asked for an investment strategy to see you through retirement. The first banker, the not-so-wise one, recommends that you put all of your money in a great technology company, backed with a huge corporate infrastructure and a global marketing strategy. That company, of course, would have been RIM or BlackBerry. And July 2007 was the end of RIM's skyrocketing share prices. It dropped from $240 to trading within weeks at $100, and today is, as we all know, worth almost nothing. The other banker, the wise banker, recommends that you invest your money in a mixture of things, some high-risk, high-productivity part of the portfolio, some low-risk but low-returns options, and that you should maintain a cash reserve in case of an emergency. This is the metaphor for the food system. The global food system is like the high-tech stock. It offers great opportunities. It means that wealthy consumers are presented with an array of options, and it means that most of us in North America only spend a fraction of our income on food. But don't put your eggs in one basket. We need to shift some of our buying habits to that local system. Sure, it doesn't provide the same returns. It'll cost a bit more. But it will protect us from the vagaries of the market and will offer non-market benefits like reconnecting consumers and farmers, helping protect biodiversity, things like that. Equally, we need better reserves in our city, better food reserves. These act as a cash reserve in our investment portfolio, that bag of gold buried in the back or hidden under the mattress. This is our safety net in case of emergency. Together, a blended portfolio of food security strategies is the only sensible approach to gain the benefits of long-distance transportation while reducing some of the negative consequences. Thank you very much.